My name is Daisy Miller and I'm 32 years old. For most of my life, the world saw me as a quiet echo in a house built for a resounding boom. The boom was my brother Mark, the future of our family, the golden child destined for a corner office and a weighty nameplate on his door. And I was the keeper of the past, a dusty relic in the attic with my useless craft. My family never expected that the quiet, rhythmic clatter of my inherited looms would one day make a sound so loud it would be heard across the world, nor did they imagine that I would stand on a glittering stage and announce a legacy they couldn't comprehend, all while they sat in the front row forced to listen. They thought they were investing in the family's future, but they had backed the wrong horse and the race was already over. Before I reveal how a forgotten art form became my sweetest revenge and how an attic full of dusty threads transformed into an empire, I want to welcome you to my story. It's a long one, so get comfortable. Go ahead and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you've ever felt underestimated or had a passion that no one else seemed to understand, hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. And if you're new here, make sure you subscribe because this is a community for people who know what it's like to have to build your own future when no one else will build it for you. The attic was my kingdom, but it was a kingdom of exile. It smelled of cedar, aging paper, and the faint lanolin scent of raw wool that clung to everything like a ghostly presence. It was my great-grandmother Elspeth's domain before it was mine, and her spirit felt woven into the very dust motes that danced in the single shaft of light from the grimy round window. Two immense wooden floor looms, their timber frames scarred with the nicks and gouges of a century of use, dominated the space. They were beasts of wood and iron, intricate contraptions of heddles, reeds, and treadles that looked to my family like instruments of a forgotten, irrelevant age. To me, they were my confidants, my collaborators, the silent, sturdy witnesses to my life. My childhood was a long, quiet lesson in understanding my place. I was a footnote in the grand narrative of my brother Mark. I remember being 6 years old, having spent a whole week on a tiny frame loom, weaving a clumsy rainbow-striped rectangle for my mother. My small fingers were clumsy, the tension was uneven, and the edges were wavy, but it was the most beautiful thing I had ever made. I ran downstairs, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, and held it up to her. "Look, Mom. I made it for you." She was on the phone, a hand pressed to her ear, but she glanced down, her eyes crinkling in a smile that didn't quite reach them. "Oh, that's lovely, sweetie. Very colorful." Then her attention snapped back to the phone. "Yes, he won. First place in the regional spelling bee. The principal said he's never seen a second grader with such a vocabulary." She spent the next 20 minutes recounting Mark's triumph, while I stood there, the rainbow in my hands slowly dimming, its colors turning to gray. I quietly placed it on the edge of the kitchen counter, where it was later accidentally swept into the trash with the vegetable peels. I didn't cry. I had already learned that my accomplishments were quiet things, meant to be kept to myself. As we grew older, the disparity became a codified family doctrine. Mark's future was a tangible, high-stakes project that required constant funding and universal applause. My passions were quaint, frivolous distractions. When I was 15, my high school offered a summer intensive course in textile arts, taught by a visiting artist from New York. It was a chance to learn about natural dyes, complex pattern drafting, things I had only dreamed of. The fee was $300. I presented the brochure to my parents at the dinner table, my voice trembling with a hope so fierce it felt like a sickness. My father, Richard, a man who measured the world in profit margins and potential returns, barely glanced at it. He pushed his glasses up his nose and looked at me over the top of them, a look of pained patience on his face. "Daisy, $300 is a lot of money for a weaving class." My mother, Helen, ever the pragmatist, chimed in, her tone gentle but firm. "And Mark's debate club is going to the national tournament in DC that same month. The travel fees, the hotel, we have to be practical, honey. We have to invest in the things that will build a real future." Mark, who was 14 but already carried the self-assuredness of a future litigator, piped up from across the table, his mouth full of mashed potatoes. "Yeah, Daisy. What are you going to do with weaving? Open a potholder stand." He meant it as a joke, a bit of brotherly teasing, but the sting was sharp and real. My father chuckled. "He has a point, sweetheart." I felt the familiar heat rise in my cheeks, a blush of shame and anger so profound it was suffocating. I folded the brochure into a tight square under the table, its sharp corners digging into my palm. I excused myself, claiming I had homework. I spent the rest of the evening in the attic, the rhythmic thud of the beater against the weft the only sound that could drown out the echo of their casual dismissal. Mark went to DC. I stayed home and taught myself how to make dye from onion skins and black beans, using books I checked out from the library. The family's future was a singular, monolithic entity, and it had Mark's face. The choice of university was the final, undeniable confirmation of this hierarchy. Mark was accepted into a prestigious, top-tier university 3 states away for their pre-law program. The acceptance letter was framed and hung in the living room. My parents took out a second mortgage on our modest suburban home to cover the exorbitant tuition and living expenses. There were hushed, stressed conversations about it late at night that I was supposed to be asleep for. "We'll make it work, Helen. It's an investment. The boy will be a judge one day," my father would say, his voice a low rumble through my bedroom floor. When my turn came a year later, my portfolio of textile work was strong enough, according to my art teacher, to get me into some of the best art and design colleges in the country. I dreamed of RSD or SED, of being surrounded by people who understood the language of color and texture, who saw power in a well-made object. I presented my acceptance letters to my parents, my hands shaking. They sat me down at the kitchen table, a somber tribunal. "Daisy," my father began, his tone weary as if my dreams were a heavy burden he was forced to carry. "We just can't. We are stretched to the absolute limit for Mark. A law degree, that has prestige. It secures a future. An art degree is, well, it's a gamble. A very, very expensive gamble." My mother placed her hand over mine. Her hand was soft, but her words were hard. "There's a wonderful business administration program at the local community college. Sensible. You could live at home. It would give you practical skills, something to fall back on." The phrase "fall back on" was a dagger. My art, my passion, was already being framed as a failure, a thing from which I would need rescuing by a sensible 2-year degree in bookkeeping. I looked at their faces, etched with financial worry and an unshakable conviction that they were doing the right thing, and I capitulated. I couldn't bear the thought of being the reason for their ruin, the selfish daughter who chased a whim while her brother built an empire. So I went to community college. I learned about spreadsheets and marketing plans. I hated every single second of it. I graduated with a piece of paper that felt like a certificate of surrender and got a quiet, stable job as an administrative assistant at a local insurance firm. Every paycheck I would skim a little off the top for myself, tucking it away to buy merino wool or silk threads, hiding the receipts at the bottom of my purse like a guilty secret. The attic became my real life. My days were spent in a beige cubicle under fluorescent lights, but my nights were spent under the single bare bulb of the attic, creating. The looms were my freedom. The rhythmic clack-thump of the treadles and beater was a meditation, a reclamation of myself. The attic was both my sanctuary and my cell. It was the only place I didn't have to be sensible Daisy, the responsible daughter, the overlooked sister. Up there, surrounded by skeins of yarn that glowed like jewels in the dim light, I was a creator. I was an artist. I was the master of my own small universe. But it was a universe of one. The dust of generations was thick on the floorboards, a soft gray blanket over forgotten furniture and boxes of my father's old accounting textbooks. I had cleared a space in the center for the 2 looms, my great-grandmother Elspeth's looms. I often wondered what she was like. My mother only spoke of her in vague terms as a stern woman from a harder time. But a woman who operated these magnificent machines, who understood the intricate mathematics of warp and weft, couldn't have been merely stern. She must have had a fire in her, a passion for creation that my family had conveniently edited out of her history, just as they were trying to edit it out of mine. I poured all my unspoken feelings into the threads. My frustration became jagged lines of crimson. My loneliness became deep, endless pools of indigo. My hope, a fragile, persistent thing, was a single shimmering thread of gold that I would weave into almost every piece. It was a secret signature. A message to myself that even in the dust and shadows, something beautiful could still shine. The humiliation, however, could not be confined to the attic. It followed me downstairs. I remember one Thanksgiving, the house was filled with the boisterous noise of extended family. My uncle, a portly man named Robert who sold insurance, turned to me during a lull in the conversation. "So, Daisy, what are you up to these days? Still at that insurance place?" Before I could answer, my father clapped Mark on the shoulder, beaming with a pride so bright it was almost blinding. Mark just made lead counsel on a big case at his firm. 27 years old and he's already a star. Tell them about it, son. Mark, ever gracious in his victory, launched into an impressive, jargon-filled account of his legal triumphs. Everyone listened, rapt. When he finished, to a chorus of wows, and that's amazing, my uncle turned back to me, his attention already wandering. So yeah, insurance. Good, stable. I felt a sudden reckless urge to claim my own space, to be seen. I'm still at the firm, yes, I said, my voice higher than I intended. But I've been spending most of my free time weaving. A dead silence fell over the table. My father's smile tightened. Oh, that, he said, and then he let out a short, sharp laugh. Yes, our Daisy. She's up in that dusty attic, weaving her way into spinsterhood. The table erupted in laughter. It wasn't cruel, not exactly. It was the easy, thoughtless laughter of people who simply could not conceive of my life having any value outside of their narrow, pre-approved definitions of success. I looked at Mark, hoping for an ally, a flicker of defense. He just looked down at his plate, a faint, uncomfortable smile on his lips. He said nothing. The silence from him was louder than all their laughter combined. I felt my face burn, the heat of it prickling behind my eyes. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to run back to my attic and never come down again. The financial disparity was a constant, oppressive weight. Every spare dollar, my parents would say as if it were a mantra, goes to Mark's future. It became the justification for everything. The reason we never went on vacation. The reason my mother's coat was a decade old. The reason the family car rattled and coughed like an old man. It was all for Mark. His tuition, his rent for a swanky apartment near his university, his tailored suits for interviews, his bar exam prep courses. The stream of money flowing from our small house to his burgeoning career was relentless. I saw the toll it took on my parents. I saw the worry lines deepening around my mother's eyes and the way my father's shoulders slumped a little more each year. I wasn't angry at them for the sacrifices they made. I was angry that they had decided only one of their children was worth sacrificing for. One summer, I had managed to save up $600 from my meager salary. It was the most money I had ever had to myself. I planned to take a small trip just for a weekend to the coast. I had a motel picked out, a cheap, no-frills place, but it was near the ocean. I dreamed of the salt air and the sound of the waves, a brief respite from the beige walls of my office and the dusty silence of my attic. A week before I was set to leave, I overheard my mother on the phone with Mark. Her voice was strained, thin with anxiety. I know, honey, I know it's expensive. We'll figure it out. The Comprehensive Guide to Corporate Tort Law. Yes, I wrote it down. After she hung up, she sat at the kitchen table with her head in her hands. I knew that textbook cost a fortune. I knew they didn't have it. I walked to my room, took the $600 out of the envelope where I'd been keeping it, and walked back to the kitchen. I placed the cash on the table beside her. Here, I said, my voice flat. For Mark's book. She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. She didn't ask about my trip. She didn't ask how I had saved it. She just took it, her hand closing over the bills. Oh, Daisy. Thank you, dear. It's for the family's future. She said it with such conviction as if she were thanking a patriotic citizen for buying war bonds. There was no recognition that she had just taken my dream, my one small piece of freedom, and fed it into the ever-hungry machine of my brother's success. That night, instead of packing a bag for the coast, I went up to the attic and began my most ambitious project yet. I decided to weave the ocean I would never get to see. I would pour all the salt and the wind and the vast, lonely expanse of it into the threads. I called it the River of Time, a tapestry of deep blues, churning greens, and the frothy white of breaking waves, with a single defiant thread of gold running through it all. Months bled into one another. I finished the River of Time, and it was, I knew, the best thing I had ever created. It was huge, nearly 6 feet tall, and it held the weight of all my unspoken grief and untraveled miles. It hung in the attic for weeks, a silent, shimmering testament to my secret life. My only real friend, Clara, was the one who dragged it into the light. Clara was a force of nature, a woman who had escaped our sleepy town for a decade in New York City and returned with a new haircut, a new sense of purpose, and enough confidence for both of us. She had sunk her life savings into opening a small, fiercely independent art gallery on Main Street, a splash of vibrant color in a sea of beige storefronts. She came over one afternoon with a bottle of cheap wine and a determination that could level mountains. I took her up to the attic as I often did, to show her my latest work. When she saw the river of time, she simply stopped. She put the wine bottle down on a dusty trunk and walked towards it, her footsteps slow and reverent. "Daisy," she whispered, her voice thick with awe. "By God. This is..." She didn't have the words. She reached out a hand but stopped just short of touching the fabric. "This is not a hobby. This is a masterpiece." I shrugged, the familiar habit of self-deprecation a reflex. "It's just something I was playing with." Clara spun around, her eyes blazing. "Don't you dare. Don't you dare say that. You are not playing. You are creating worlds. And this," she said, gesturing to the tapestry, "needs to be in my gallery. Now." Panic seized me. A cold, terrifying dread. No, I can't. What if my family sees it? They'll laugh. They'll make jokes." "Then let them laugh," Clara shot back, her voice ringing with conviction. "Let them be the fools who stood in front of a masterpiece and saw only a joke. You cannot hide this, Daisy. You cannot hide yourself. It's an insult to the art. It's an insult to your great-grandmother. It's an insult to you." She was relentless. She argued, she cajoled, she pleaded. Finally, worn down by her belief in me, a belief I couldn't yet muster for myself, I agreed. "But on one condition. You can't use my real name," I said. "Put it under a pseudonym." We settled on D. Meadows. It was a nod to my name, Daisy, but distant enough to feel like a shield. 2 days later, with my heart pounding in my throat, I helped Clara hang the River of Time on the main wall of her gallery. It looked magnificent, the gallery lights picking out the golden thread and making the whole piece seem to shimmer and breathe. I felt a terrifying mix of pride and fear. I had sent a piece of my soul out into the world, and I had no idea if the world would cherish it or trample it underfoot. I didn't tell my family. This one small act of defiance, this one secret, was entirely my own. For 3 weeks, the River of Time hung in Clara's gallery. A few locals complimented it. An elderly woman tried to haggle Clara down to $50 for it, saying it would make a lovely blanket for her cat. I swung between hope and despair, convinced that my family had been right all along. It was a useless, valueless craft. Then on a sleepy Tuesday afternoon, everything changed. I was at my desk at the insurance firm, my mind numbingly focused on reconciling a spreadsheet of premium payments, a task so soul-crushing it felt like a form of punishment. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Clara. I almost ignored it, but she called again immediately. I ducked into the hallway whispering, "Clara, I'm at work." "Quit your job," she said, her voice a breathless, high-pitched squeak. "I'm not kidding, Daisy. Quit your job right now and get down to the gallery." "What are you talking about? Did the cat lady come back?" "No," she practically shrieked. "Julian Vance is here. In my gallery. In our town. He's standing in front of your tapestry and he hasn't moved for 20 minutes. The name hit me like a physical blow. Julian Vance. The Julian Vance. He was a legend, a fashion designer who was more of a reclusive artist than a couturier. His work was revolutionary, architectural, almost alien in its beauty. He was famous for his use of unconventional materials, fabrics woven with metallic fibers, dresses sculpted from treated wood veneer, gowns that looked like captured nebulae. He was a god in the world I only dreamed of inhabiting. "That's not funny, Clara," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm not being funny. He's on some sort of cross-country inspiration trip, trying to get away from the city. Just walked in. He wants to buy it, Daisy. For a price you won't believe. And he wants to meet you. He wants to talk about a commission." I felt the blood drain from my face. The bland, beige hallway of the insurance office started to tilt. A commission. From Julian Vance. It was impossible. It was a fairy tale. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, I managed to choke out before hanging up and walking numbly back to my desk. I looked at the spreadsheet, at the endless columns of numbers that represented my sensible life. Without a second thought, I closed the file, turned off my computer, picked up my purse and walked out of the building, leaving my sensible life behind me forever. When I walked into Clara's gallery, the air was thick with an almost electric tension. A tall, slender man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes was standing before the River of Time. He was dressed simply in black jeans and a gray cashmere sweater, but he carried an aura of intense focus that made him seem utterly separate from the world around him. This was Julian Vance. Clara, looking pale and ecstatic, scurried over to me. "He's been asking a million questions about D. Meadows," she whispered. "He thinks you're some wise old hermit living in the woods." Vance turned then, his gaze falling on me. His eyes, which I expected to be critical or aloof, were surprisingly gentle. They were the eyes of a seeker, of someone who understood the language of creation. "You are D. Meadows?" he asked, his voice soft with a faint European accent I couldn't place. I nodded, unable to speak. "I am Daisy," I finally managed. "Daisy Miller." He smiled, a small, genuine smile. "Daisy. Of course. It's beautiful." He turned back to the tapestry. "This piece, it has a soul. In my world we are drowning in soulless things. Mass-produced, machine-made perfection. There is no story in it. But this," he gestured to the weaving, "this is a saga. I have been looking for a new language for my next collection. A new texture. A new voice. I believe I have just found it." We sat at the small table in the back of Clara's gallery, and for the next hour, Julian Vance spoke about his vision. He was planning a collection called Echoes of Antiquity, inspired by lost civilizations and forgotten arts. He didn't see my work as a quaint craft. He saw it as a living link to that past, but with a modern, raw, emotional power. "I do not want to buy a few pieces, Daisy," he said, his blue eyes fixed on mine. "I want to commission you. I want you to be the heart of this collection. I want you to create the signature fabrics. All of them. I want your story, your spirit, woven into every single garment that walks down that runway in Paris." He slid a folder across the table. It was a contract. I opened it, my hands trembling so badly I could barely read the words. The numbers I saw made my head spin. The advance he was offering was more than I made in 5 years at the insurance firm. It was a life-changing, world-altering amount of money. It was validation in the form of a legal document. "You would need to start immediately," he said. "We are on a tight schedule for Fashion Week. Can you do it?" I thought of the attic. Of the years of secret work. Of the dismissive laughter. Of the golden thread of hope. I looked at Julian Vance, a man who saw not a hobbyist but a genius. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and steady for the first time. "I can do it." The decision to tell my family was terrifying. Felt like stepping off a cliff, not knowing if I would fly or fall. I was so used to their skepticism that a part of me expected them to find a flaw in this, too, to somehow diminish this incredible, impossible opportunity. I chose to do it at the traditional Sunday dinner, a weekly ritual of pot roast and passive aggression. Mark was there, freshly triumphant from a recent courtroom victory, and he was holding court as usual. My parents were hanging on his every word. I waited for a pause in the monologue, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I have some news," I announced into the brief silence. 3 pairs of eyes turned to me, their expressions ranging from mild curiosity to impatience. "I'm quitting my job at the insurance firm." My mother's fork clattered against her plate. "Quitting? Daisy, why? It's a good stable job. You have benefits." "I've been offered a project," I said, the word commission feeling too grand for this audience. "A fashion designer, his name is Julian Vance, saw one of my tapestries and he's hired me to create all the fabrics for his next collection." The silence that followed was heavy and judgmental. My father took a slow sip of his water, his brow furrowed. "A fashion designer? One of those flighty, artsy types? Daisy, that sounds incredibly risky. What if he changes his mind? What if he doesn't pay you? You're giving up a steady paycheck for a whim." "It's not a whim, Dad. It's a formal contract. A big one." Mark leaned forward, adopting the patient, condescending tone he used when explaining complex concepts to people he considered his intellectual inferiors. "Daisy, that's great, but you have to be careful. People in your position, artists, are often taken advantage of. Why don't you let me have one of the junior associates at the firm look over this contract, for you? Just to make sure you're protected." The air quotes he put around the word contract were like a slap in the face. He didn't see me as a professional entering into a business agreement. He saw me as a naive child playing with crayons who had stumbled into the adult world and needed her big brother, the real professional, to save her from herself. That was the moment something inside me snapped. The desperate, pleading part of me that had craved their approval for 3 decades went silent. It was a quiet, painless death. I looked at the 3 of them, my worried mother, my cynical father, my condescending brother, and I saw them clearly for the first time. They were not the arbiters of my worth. They were just people with limited imaginations. "Thank you for the offer, Mark," I said, my voice eerily calm. "But I've already read it. And I've already signed it. The advance has already cleared." I stood up from the table. "I'm moving my looms out of the attic. I need to set up a proper studio." I walked out of the dining room without another word, leaving them sitting in a pool of stunned silence. The war for their validation was over. I hadn't won. I had simply refused to fight anymore. The next 6 months were a blur of frenetic, joyous creation. I rented a large, sun-drenched loft space in a converted mill on the other side of town, a place with high ceilings and huge windows. The day I moved my great-grandmother's looms out of the attic was a ceremony of liberation. As 2 movers carefully navigated the heavy timber frames down the narrow attic stairs, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. My new studio was my haven. It smelled of new beginnings, of sawdust and sizing, and the clean, earthy scent of the natural dyes I was now able to buy in bulk. I hired a young art school graduate named Maya as my assistant, a bright, eager girl who looked at my looms with the same reverence I did. Together we worked from dawn until long after dusk. I was no longer just an artist. I was a business owner, an employer, a collaborator. I had conference calls with Vance's team in Paris, discussing color palettes and texture requirements. I managed a budget, ordered supplies by the crate, and oversaw production schedules. The work was grueling but exhilarating. I was dyeing vast vats of wool in shades of lapis lazuli, terracotta, and verdigris, colors inspired by the ancient world Vance had described. I warped the looms with thousands of threads, my hands moving with a speed and confidence that surprised even me. I was weaving my soul into yards and yards of fabric, each piece unique, each one telling a part of my story. My family kept their distance. They would call, their conversations stilted and awkward. "How is your project coming along?" my mother would ask, the word project still sounding like a euphemism for a childish fantasy. Mark sent me a text once, "Hope the sewing is going well. Don't forget to take breaks." It was clear they were waiting for it all to fall apart, for me to come crawling back to the safety of my sensible life. But I wasn't falling. I was flying. Julian Vance would call me personally once a week. He never asked about deadlines or yardage. He would ask, "Daisy, what are the threads telling you this week?" He understood. He saw the magic. His belief in me was a shield against my family's doubt. As the first shipment of fabric was packed up, ready to be sent to the atelier in Paris, I stood in the middle of my studio, surrounded by the beautiful chaos of my new life. Maya was carefully labeling the crates. The looms stood silent for the first time in weeks. I ran my hand over a leftover scrap of fabric, its texture complex and rich under my fingers. This was real. I had made this. I wasn't the girl in the attic anymore. I was the woman in the studio. And I was just getting started. The invitation arrived in a thick, cream-colored envelope with Parisian postmarks. It was an official invitation to Julian Vance's show during Paris Fashion Week. Tucked inside were 5 tickets for the front row and a handwritten note from Vance himself. "My dear Daisy," it read, "a creator must be present for the birth of her creation. This collection has your heartbeat. You must be here to see it come to life. Bring your family. It is important that they see what you have made." My first instinct was to go alone. The thought of having them there, of watching them watch my work, filled me with a familiar dread. What if they still didn't get it? What if they sat there with polite, blank faces, their minds already on Mark's next legal brief? But Vance's words echoed in my mind. It is important that they see. He was right. This wasn't about seeking their approval anymore. This was about them bearing witness to my reality. I mailed them the tickets without comment. My mother called, her voice a flutter of excitement. "Paris. Oh, Daisy. How wonderful. Your father had to move a few things around, but we can make it. A little vacation." Mark was even more dismissive. "Paris, huh? Nice. I guess I can take a long weekend. It'll be a funny story to tell the partners at the office. My little sister's sewing project took us to Paris." The phrase sewing project still dripped with condescension, but it didn't sting anymore. He just sounded pathetic. I realized with a jolt that I pitied him. I pitied his inability to see beyond his own narrow definition of success. "That's fine, Mark," I said, a strange sense of calm settling over me. "Come, or don't. It's up to you." They all came. Paris was a whirlwind of impossibly beautiful architecture and a language I didn't speak. My family was like tourists in my new life, awkward and out of place. They were impressed by the five-star hotel Vance had booked for us, by the sheer glamour of it all, but they still treated my involvement as a quirky little adventure, a fun bit of luck that had befallen their unassuming Daisy. The night of the show, the air in the historic venue, a grand old museum, crackled with anticipation. The space was packed with a formidable crowd of fashion editors, movie stars, artists and billionaires. My parents, dressed in their Sunday best, looked bewildered. My father kept muttering about the cost of the champagne being served. Mark, in a slick, expensive suit, tried to look nonchalant, but his eyes darted around the room, taking in the power and influence, a language he understood far better than art. We were seated in the front row, directly across the runway from the world's most famous fashion critic, a woman so fearsome she was known to make designers weep. I felt a tremor of anxiety, but then I took a deep breath. This was my night. The lights went down. A single haunting note from a cello filled the silence. Then the first model emerged from the darkness. She wore a gown of the deepest indigo, the fabric I had called Midnight Ocean. It moved not like cloth but like water. As she walked, the intricate patterns I had woven into it seemed to shift and swirl, catching the light in 1,000 different ways. A collective, audible gasp went through the audience. It was a sound of pure wonder. I chanced to glance at my family. My mother's hand was pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with a disbelief that was slowly melting into awe. My father, who had been complaining about the music being too loud just moments before, was leaning forward, his cynical smirk completely gone, replaced by a look of slack-jawed astonishment. Mark's face was a mask of utter confusion. He stared at the gown, then at me, then back at the gown. I could see the dawning recognition in his eyes. He was seeing the patterns, the textures, the very soul of the work I had done in secret for so many years, now displayed as high art, as couture, under the adoring gaze of the entire world. One by one, the models walked the runway, each garment a testament to the fabric that was its heart. There was a sharp, tailored coat made from terracotta earth, its threads the color of desert clay. There was a flowing dress of verdigris bloom, shimmering like oxidized copper. Each piece was a symphony of texture and color, and the audience was rapt. They weren't just looking at clothes. They were looking at stories, at history, at a forgotten language brought back to life. With each new look, I could feel the atmosphere in the room growing more electric, more reverent. I saw the fearsome fashion critic across from me scribbling furiously in her notebook, a small, rare smile playing on her lips. The final piece was a bridal gown, a creation of impossible complexity made from a fabric I had named Golden Hope, the one that incorporated my signature thread of shimmering gold. It was a masterpiece of tailoring and weaving, and as the model took her final turn, the audience erupted into a spontaneous, thunderous ovation before the show had even officially ended. The applause was a physical force, a wave of sound that washed over me, and for the first time I didn't flinch from it. I let it hold me up. Julian Vance walked out onto the runway, looking elegant and serene amidst the chaos. He took a deep, graceful bow as the applause intensified. Then he held up a hand for silence. He walked to a microphone that was discreetly brought to the stage. "Thank you," he said, his voice carrying through the vast hall. "Thank you all. But the true genius of this collection is not me." He turned and his eyes found mine. "The genius is the artist who created the soul of it. The woman who wove history and hope into every thread. Please, join me in honoring the incredible talent of Miss Daisy Miller." He extended his hand to me. For a second I was frozen. Then I felt a gentle push from my mother, a gesture of pure, unadulterated pride. I stood up on trembling legs and walked onto the runway. The spotlight hit me hot and white and terrifyingly bright. The applause doubled, a roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. Vance squeezed my hand, then gestured to an assistant who brought out a beautiful heavy crystal award. The board of the International Fashion Syndicate was so moved by this work, Vance announced, that they have created a special inaugural prize. the award for Artisan of the Year. And its first recipient is Daisy Miller. He handed me the award. It was heavy, real solid in my hands. He then guided me to the microphone. The hall fell into a profound silence. I looked out at the sea of faces and then my eyes found them. My mother, my father, my brother. They were looking at me as if they had never seen me before. And perhaps they hadn't. I gripped the sides of the lectern to steady my shaking hands. The crystal award next to it seemed to gather all the light in the room. I took a deep breath, the scent of expensive perfume and dust from the old building filling my lungs. I looked past the blinding lights, focusing on the 3 stunned faces in the front row. "Thank you, Julian," I began, my voice surprisingly steady. "Thank you for seeing something in my work when I had almost stopped seeing it in myself." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. For most of my life I worked in a small, dusty attic. I worked on looms that belonged to my great-grandmother, a woman from a world that everyone told me was long gone. I was told that this passion of mine, this connection to a traditional art, was a step backward in time. That it was a useless craft. I saw my father flinch, the words hitting him like small, sharp stones. My family, I continued, my gaze sweeping over all 3 of them, saw the future in sensible jobs in courtrooms and contracts, not in the quiet, patient work of weaving threads into a story. They invested every spare dollar, every hope, every dream in my brother's law degree. He was to be the symbol of our family's success, our step forward into the modern world. Mark's face was ashen. He looked like he had been physically struck. My mother had tears streaming down her face, but I didn't know if they were tears of pride or shame or both. I was left to my useless craft in the attic, I said, my voice dropping a little, becoming more intimate, as if I were sharing a secret with 1,000 of my closest friends. But tonight that useless craft is being celebrated on a global stage. Tonight, an art form that was dismissed as a hobby is the heart of this magnificent collection. And it has done more than just create beautiful clothes. It has given me the means to ensure that other artisans, other keepers of heritage, other weavers of useless crafts, never have to feel as if their work is a step backward. I stood up a little straighter, feeling a surge of power that was utterly new to me. So tonight I am thrilled to announce the official launch of the Weavers Heritage Foundation. A foundation dedicated to providing grants, studio space, and mentorship to traditional artisans around the world, so that these vital skills, these beautiful histories, are not relegated to dusty attics. I let that sink in. I could see the confusion on my family's faces. They were trying to process it, to understand the scale of what was happening. I saved the final blow, the coup de grace, for last. I delivered it not with anger or malice, but with the simple, irrefutable clarity of a fact stated in a legal deposition. The foundation is fully endowed by the profits from my new company, a company built on the very craft that was so easily dismissed. A company whose first-year revenue has already surpassed that of my brother's entire law firm. Pin drop silence. The kind of silence that is so complete it has a sound of its own. I looked directly at Mark. His mouth was slightly open, his lawyerly composure completely and utterly decimated. He looked broken. My parents seemed to have shrunk in their seats. Then someone in the audience, a woman with bright red hair in the second row, stood up and began to clap. Then another and another, until the entire hall was on its feet. The applause not just a sound, but a deafening, overwhelming roar of validation that had absolutely nothing to do with my family. It was all my own. Backstage was a chaotic ballet of beautiful people. Models rushed past in silk robes, photographers' flashes strobed relentlessly, and champagne corks popped with startling regularity. Julian Vance had steered me into a small, private salon, away from the clamor. A moment of peace for the artist, he'd said with a wink. But the peace was short-lived. A moment later the door opened and my family filed in. They closed the door behind them and the sudden quiet was more deafening than the party outside. The air was thick with everything that had been said and, more importantly, everything that hadn't been said for the past 30 years. My mother spoke first, her voice watery and choked with emotion. She rushed forward and tried to hug me, but I stood my ground, holding the heavy crystal award like a shield. "Daisy, darling," she wept. "We are so proud of you. We just never knew. We never understood." It felt hollow, a desperate attempt to rewrite history in real time. I just looked at her, my expression unreadable. My father stood by the door, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, looking at the pattern on the expensive rug as if it held the secrets to the universe. He couldn't meet my eyes. He, a man of numbers and balance sheets, had just been confronted with a ledger he could never hope to reconcile. It was Mark who finally broke the tension. He stepped forward, his face pale and tight, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume. "Daisy," he said, his voice strained, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "More profitable than my entire firm? Was that really necessary? To say that up there in front of all those people?" I turned my full attention to him. I felt a strange, detached calm. The old Daisy, the one who lived in his shadow, would have crumbled, apologized, and tried to smooth things over. That Daisy was gone. "Necessary," I repeated, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of the crystal in my hands. "Tell me, Mark, was it necessary for you to call my life's work a sewing project, in front of our parents? Was it necessary for Dad to get a cheap laugh at Thanksgiving by joking about me dying a spinster because of my passion? Was it necessary for the two of you to decide that only one of your children was worth believing in?" He had no answer. He just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. "I didn't say it with malice, Mark," I continued, my voice softening slightly. "I said it as a statement of fact. You're a lawyer. You deal in facts. Well, so do I now. And the fact is, the thing you all dismissed is more successful than the thing you all worshipped. That is the truth. And I will not apologize for speaking the truth anymore." I finally looked at all three of them, my family, my antagonists, my history. "I love you," I said, and I meant it. "You are my family. But the dynamic we've been living with is over. It ends tonight. From now on you will respect what I do. And you will respect me. The girl you thought you knew, the quiet, accommodating one in the attic. She doesn't live here anymore." I then walked past them, opened the door, and stepped back into the bright, noisy celebration, leaving them alone in the quiet room to grapple with the new world I had just created. The days that followed were surreal. My face and my fabrics were on the cover of every major fashion magazine. Vogue called the collection a watershed moment, a return to soul in an industry that had lost its own. The New York Times ran a feature on me, not in the style section but in the business section, titled "The Weaver's Revenge: How Heritage Craft Became High-Tech Profit." My new company, which I had officially named Attic Looms in a final act of defiant reclamation, was inundated with requests. Museums wanted to exhibit my early works. Other design houses wanted collaborations. Film studios wanted to license my fabrics for period costumes. It was a deluge, an overwhelming flood of the success my family had been so certain I could never achieve. 2 weeks after the show, my father called. I almost didn't answer. The conversation was stilted at first, full of awkward pleasantries. Then his voice cracked. "Daisy," he said, and for the first time in my life, I heard genuine humility in his tone. I was wrong. About everything. I was a fool, blinded by my own stupid ideas about what success looked like. What you do, it's not a step back. It's incredible. Your great-grandmother. God, she would have been so proud of you. I was silent for a long moment, processing the words I had waited my whole life to hear. "Thank you, Dad," I said quietly. "That means a lot to me." It wasn't a magical fix. It didn't erase 30 years of dismissal. But it was a start. It was a crack in the wall. Mark's apology came in person. He showed up unannounced at my new, bustling studio. He stood in the doorway, looking utterly lost amidst the organized chaos of whirring looms, vats of dye, and the cheerful chatter of my growing team of employees. I had to ask him who he was. He looked at me, his eyes full of a shame that seemed genuine. He walked over to where I was inspecting a new bolt of fabric. "I've been an arrogant idiot," he said, not preamble, no excuses. "A complete and utter fool. I measured worth in dollars and prestige and job titles, the way Dad taught us to. It's the only language I ever learned. I was so busy building my own kingdom that I never once stopped to look over and see the beautiful, incredible one you were building all on your own. I didn't just underestimate you, Daisy. I never even saw you." He looked around the studio at the vibrant life pulsing in the room. Can we start over? Can you teach me how to see?" It was a plea, not a demand. The condescending armor was gone. I saw for the first time in a long time, the little boy I used to build forts with in the backyard. I nodded slowly. "Okay, Mark," I said. "We can start over." The past was a tapestry I couldn't unweave, but perhaps we could start a new one together with new colors and a stronger, more honest pattern. A year later, I stood on another stage, this one smaller and far less glamorous than the runway in Paris, but infinitely more meaningful. It was a brightly lit auditorium at a local university, the venue for the first ever Weavers Heritage Foundation Awards ceremony. The air smelled not of perfume but of popcorn and genuine excitement. I was presenting the foundation's largest grant to a brilliant young Navajo weaver from Arizona, a young woman named Kiona whose work with traditional patterns was so innovative it took my breath away. As she accepted the oversized check and the award, her eyes shining with tears, I glanced out at the audience. My parents were there. They weren't in the front row this time. I hadn't put them there. They had bought their own tickets and were sitting in the middle of the crowd, just two anonymous, proud parents. The look on their faces was not the shocked awe of Paris, but a quiet, steady and deeply felt pride. It was real. Next to them was Mark. He looked different. The slick corporate lawyer veneer was gone. He wore a simple, comfortable sweater and his hair was a little longer. He had his arm around his wife and he was beaming at the stage, his applause for Kiona the loudest in the room. 3 months after our talk in my studio, he had shocked everyone by quitting his high-powered job at the prestigious law firm. He told our parents that he was tired of fighting for corporations and wanted to fight for people instead. He had since taken on all the pro bono legal work for my foundation, helping artisans like Kiona navigate the complexities of contracts and intellectual property rights. He had found his own meaning, not in the reflection of our father's ambition, but in the service of the very world he had once dismissed. He had stepped out of the golden spotlight and found that he preferred the warmth of a smaller, more authentic light. After the ceremony, my parents came up to me, my mother clutching the event program to her chest. "Oh, Daisy, that young woman's work is just breathtaking," she said, her eyes alight with genuine interest. "Can you explain the meaning of the Yii by Chi patterns she was talking about?" My father, meanwhile, was talking to Kiona's father, a quiet, weathered man, the two of them finding common ground in the shared, universal language of paternal pride. Mark came over and gave me a hug. "You did a good thing here, Daisy," he whispered. "A really good thing. Our relationship wasn't perfect, none of it was. There were still scars. The tapestry of our family history was still full of knots and tangled threads. But we were working on it. We were weaving new lines, mending the old ones, creating a new pattern. It wasn't about forgiveness, not entirely. It was about acceptance. It was about seeing each other for who we truly were, not who we were supposed to be. They say that success is the best revenge, that the greatest victory is proving your doubters wrong. I stood on that stage in Paris, a global symbol of success, and I laid my family's dismissal bare for the world to see. It was a moment of supreme, undeniable vindication. But as the months turned into a year and the noise faded, I learned that this old saying isn't entirely true. The satisfaction of proving others wrong is a fleeting, hollow thing. It's a sugar high that inevitably leads to a crash. True success, the kind that sustains you, the kind that brings you peace, isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. My victory wasn't that my company made more money than my brother's law firm. My victory was that I had built a life, a career, and a legacy from the one thing in the world that was authentically mine. My victory was discovering that my worth was never something my family could bestow upon me or withhold from me. It was never in their approval or their validation. It was in my hands, in my heart, and in my soul all along. It was in the threads. It was in the quiet, patient work. It was in the dusty attic, waiting for me to be brave enough to bring it into the light. My family's journey to understanding was their own to take. I couldn't force it. All I could do was live my truth so brightly and so unapologetically that they were eventually forced to see it. And they did. But by the time they came around, their approval was just a lovely, optional accessory like a beautiful scarf. It was nice to have, but I no longer needed it to stay warm. My own fire, the one I had nurtured with secret hopes and a single golden thread, was now burning bright enough to warm me for the rest of my life. What about you? What is the passion, the skill, the dream that you have held on to, even when others didn't understand? Share your story in the comments below. I truly believe our stories are the most powerful things we have. If my journey resonated with you, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories from people who have learned to build their own tables instead of waiting for a seat at someone else's. Thank you so much for joining me today, for listening to my story. Remember, your value is not determined by the opinions of others. It is inherent. It is woven into the very fabric of who you are. I wish you all the strength to see it, to claim it, and to share it with the world.